Welcome to Fort Worth 148's podcast, where we meet to discuss Masonic topics and strive to build value in the Brotherhood. The opinions and statements of the participants do not represent any positions or stance of any Grand Lodge or Lodge and are solely the viewpoints of the participants. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. This is Rick Moore, past master, current secretary of Fort Worth 148.
Grant Gates, current junior warden 148.
Gabriel Yagish, Master Mason with Fort Worth 148. And we have a special guest today.
Kyle Wahlquist with Hillcrest Lodge 1318, past master from 2010-2011 on our property management committee as chairman and currently serving as chaplain.
Sweet. We were masters the same year, Kyle.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
I didn't either till now.
Now you're
It was a good year for
together.
Yeah, it was. We'll leave it at that.
Well, Kyle, thanks for coming on the show. We're really glad to have you.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
For Scrizzle.
Absolutely. So, guys, as before we get going here and start having some fun, I think everyone's seen the weather with the hurricane and all that going on. So, due to what I do for work, I will be down helping people get their lives put back together, their businesses put back together, and we'll be taking a brief intermission from the podcast because there will not be extra time. Depends on how things work out, but it could be 3-4 weeks, maybe as long as a couple months. So we'll see what happens.
You should totally call us on the conference call from like the top of a rooftop that you're inspecting or something.
Oh, that would be cool. Yeah, we could do a podcast from the most damaged building I can find.
That'd be wicked.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Treacherous. No, be safe, but it's a good deal. It's a chance to go make some hay while the sun's shining.
Well, it does that, and it's nice to be the guy helping those folks out a little bit. You're not swinging a hammer, but you're making a hammer swing. So it's a rewarding line of work, if not taxing, but it's a good line of work. You get to help a lot of people, especially when this kind of stuff goes down. So,
No, it's a bummer all the way around, but we'll be here when you get back, Grant.
I'll look forward to being back, guys. Y'all keep rolling because I will need some podcasts out there.
We'll help out in that way, sure. So I swear this is related to listener and discussion questions. Rit, knock, knock.
What? Who's there?
It's your DDGM. You answered the door after only 2 knocks. I'm taking your charter. What is y'all's favorite Masonic joke?
Oh, my goodness. So Mark Donahue just told the one. I'm sure you've heard it. Why the Cowan broke the thermometer.
Oh, yeah.
To get the secrets of the degrees. He had a whole slew of them, though. He ended up telling 3 or 4 of them. I don't recall the others. But they were along the same line. Very cheesy.
Kyle, what do you have for us, sir? You got to go.
Just the worst dad jokes possible from Masonry. I think the one that's told most often, and if it's been circulated on this show before, I apologize, but the first one I ever heard, I think, was how many Masons does it take to change a light bulb?
How many?
Change? We're not changing anything.
That was pretty solid.
Oh, that's great. I thought it was going to be like 30 past masters to argue about the price of light bulbs. But that is even better than I thought it was going to be.
All right, so my favorite Masonic joke is a meme. I want to put it into the chat section for those who are listening. But it's Pinky in the Brain, and you guys have probably seen it, but it is one of my favorites.
Oh, taking over the world.
Yeah, a little Pinky in the Brain, guys.
That's a good one.
I feel like Pinky would be an awful senior warden. But,
yes.
Okay, so actual discussion question, and I saw this one on Reddit earlier, and I thought it was fantastic. How do you feel about practicing ritual with your significant other?
What? Well,
Yeah.
it's not legal for us, so.
Well, it depends on what you practice, right?
True that, because like I've heard of the Grand Master learning the Masonic funeral ritual with his wife on an airplane.
Yeah.
Former Grand Master, not the current, but so yeah, you're right. You could practice some things, but by and large. Now, granted, when my son was an infant, like 3 or 4 months old, he learned the EA lecture, I guess. It won't sound unfamiliar to him.
What is this about non-age? No, I'm kidding. My girlfriend has heard the apron presentation and the Bible presentation multiple times, and she spot checked because this is all printed, so it's all, it's not secret. She's heard the full part for the principal sojourner in the Royal Arch degree, which is essentially the senior deacon for that degree. It's all printed, so it's not secret, but she was instrumental in helping me learn it in a month instead of like 3. But sometimes guys, you pose that question and people are like, whoa, hold on a second. Now I can't practice anything in Blue Lodge with her, obviously, because that's all ciphered. I can't, if it's ciphered, it's secret. But yeah. So, but my dog has heard the Blue Lodge degrees multiple times. So,
absolutely. My wife heard me because I practice in the sauna. I've been very clear about this. Masonic work gets done in the sauna. Anyways, because it's my little space. My wife heard me practicing degree work. Overheard me. I guess she was in the shower and I was being noisy in my little box, and she came out and told me, she's like, "You're just speaking gibberish." So now every time I leave for the lodge, she's like, "Have fun giving secret handshakes and speaking gibberish with all your buddies."
I think the patience that is required on the part of our friends, family, and significant others is just massive.
True that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So let's move on to the main episode content of tonight. So our episode for tonight is going to be social media and the modern Mason, and our guest will be Kyle Wahlquist, the administrator of the Facebook group Texas Freemasons. So
Thanks for having me, guys.
Kyle, can you tell us a little bit about yourself outside of the Masonic lens?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm what they call digital consultant. It's kind of where business and technology meet. Do a lot of project management for large enterprises. Started my career for a little .com that was growing pretty fast about 10 years ago called Woot.com, which got bought by Amazon. Later went to go work for Best Buy Corp and helped them integrate a company that they bought into their back-end logistics systems and did some channel management for them. Then did some strategy work for Redbox DVD for a little bit. And have since been working with a consultancy here in Dallas, or Addison to be technical, mainly focusing on large-scale enterprise e-commerce. Also, kind of technically and Masonically, I've had a couple side projects. Started up the Hillcrest Lodge website, dallasfreemasonry.org. Shout out, little plug into that.
Sweet.
Founded a little application called theaccepted.org, which was a designed to kind of have like the Texas Freemasons group for every lodge and have those all networked together with inside Texas and other jurisdictions. That got me in a little bit of a hot water a few years back, so I kind of stalled that out, but it's always kind of on the back burners, maybe something to do in the future.
Once it's and then, permissible.
Yeah. Interesting story about that, but we can talk about it a little bit later. But and I've also worked on a e-com site called MasonicApparel.net, which is geared to be kind of like a marketplace solely for vendors and preferably, Masonic brothers who make really quality or unique Masonic wares that's not just found out on eBay and such. So,
sweet, like neck ties or bow ties and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's really so that way we can get guys kind of all focusing and targeting the same audience on one platform, so they can kind of share the traffic and not have so much of a burden for marketing their own goods. So it's kind of like an Amazon for Masonry.
Gotcha.
And what was that called again?
It's MasonicApparel.net.
.net. Okay, very cool.
It is very much still in beta though, but we are getting close to doing a more formal full release here in the next probably 6 weeks or so.
Get it out before Christmas.
That's the goal.
Awesome.
So, Kyle, when did you join the fraternity, and how old were you at the time?
Joined in January of 2006 after coming around the lodge for about 3 or 4 months before that, and I was 25 when I joined.
What inspired you initially to enjoy? To join, not. Well, I guess enjoy is
same thing.
Correct too. Yeah.
I'm still around, so same thing. I don't know. I just kind of felt drawn to it. I've always been very, I guess, drawn to symbols and symbolism. I majored in college with a degree in liberal arts, focusing in philosophy and political theory and religious studies. So a lot of my studies were kind of leading up to it. Initially, anyways, the people that I was studying as I was getting out of college were very tied up into the Enlightenment theory, and also digging into it, I found more and more of them were Masons, and I very much enjoyed the symbolism, not being a member and trying to figure out exactly what everything meant. And so eventually I had to go knock on a door and ask people some questions. And after a few months of that, it became very clear that I wasn't going to be able to learn anything else without being a member. So that's when I asked for a petition.
You approached it almost from a research standpoint, which I find really interesting. After you got in and had the research you needed for whatever project or whatever curiosity you were chasing, what kept you coming back to the Masonic lodges?
Well, good question. So I think first, the amount of time it truly takes to digest the work and understand intent and meaning, and then getting in and kind of revisioning your understanding of history takes quite a bit of time. So, I mean, for me to even say I had gotten to the level of research that I really wanted would be, probably starting at approaching 2 or 3 years. And then at that point, I had formed, bonding relationships. I saw an organization that I was, gaining personal development out of, while at the same time seeing that there was something inside the org structure, not inside what we do Masonically, but what we do organizationally, that was in need of help. And, I just wanted to be able to contribute. That's kind of what the work teaches us to do, right? So
that's fantastic.
Yeah,
that's a great answer, man. That's awesome.
Thanks.
So, Kyle, can you tell us a little bit about your home lodge?
Yeah. So when I first started looking around at lodges, there were a couple that were pretty close to me, but Hillcrest 1318 was the closest by far. I was a senior at SMU at the time in Dallas, and we had the lodge originally met directly across from the law school there on Hillcrest. And about 10 years prior, maybe 9 or 8 years prior, they sold that building due to the taxation in University Park and bought a small commercial building just on the other side of into Dallas City proper. That was a few blocks south of SMU. So it was very convenient. Went over there, met some guys one day right before one of their stated meetings. Had started discussing throughout dinner. They were very welcoming, took me in and just started answering whatever questions they could. They were very honest about saying, and I still use this tagline today, we'll answer whatever we can, but we won't answer what we can't. But that's not anything on you. You can ask whatever you want. There's nothing wrong with that. So any of the guys that we have come through today, he's the same thing. But so I just started going and really enjoyed the fellowship they had. It was very much smaller at the time. Definitely not as many men inquiring at the time, which statistically actually is very interesting, because the peak of interest in Masonry online was actually around, if I remember correctly, like 2004, 2005. going off a bit on a tangent here, but Google actually will serve up search data to you, and you can go back, I think, since basically its inception. And right after that time period, there was a huge spike, which is much higher than it is today, for people searching how to become a Freemason or other like terms. And the reasoning for that was what I think we've mentioned in several other conversations, and I think I've heard mentioned on this show before, was the movie National Treasure. That was probably the best jumpstart back to Masonry and getting, different facets and guys joining, which would, kind of snowball to where we are today with, people asking fairly frequently about the organization. And, oh, yeah, I've seen that movie. So, anyways, that was a bit of a tangent. Hopefully I answered that question. But pull me back on track if I got too far off.
No, I love it. That's totally interesting that the spike, because I mean, that's when I first joined, was right around that time, and I remember the National Treasure times. I mean, you had people coming in but leaving just as quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that was like really an important time for us as a fraternity, and unfortunately, I think it was mostly a great loss, just because the fraternity is not, the most technically savvy organization, if we're going to be honest. I think we're still years away from really getting to where we could be, and the amount of membership gain that we could have had in that year and the coming years, the coming decade and years after that decade, up until now, we would have long since stopped talking about membership issues if we had had different strategies at that point in time.
Yeah, we wouldn't be having that conversation today, I think.
No, and I think when we get ready to start marketing the fraternity like we should, we need to take a honest look at what National Treasure did and the lessons to be learned. Not that we need to make part 4 or anything, but
I'm all about making National Treasure part 4. Let's do this.
There was something to the way they presented the craft that got interest going, and we can somehow bottle that, you know what I mean, into different kind of marketing. I think there's a lot to learn from it. That's interesting.
So another one of the things that you said that I really liked was the way that you present asking questions to the prospective members. It's that, hey, it's not on you. Like, there's just things that we can't answer. It's very similar to what I tell a lot of the prospective guys. It's like, hey, there's going to be questions that I'm going to answer, and some that I'm not, because I don't want to spoil anything for you.
Right.
So, yeah, no spoilers. So you said, you're a past master of your lodge, and now you're the chaplain. How's your role different?
Yeah, so good question, complex answer. The role's been evolving since I became a past master, since I really got in. When I was in my year as master, I realized the deficiencies that we had from an organizational standpoint. There was a lot of younger membership, and by a lot I mean like 2 or 3 younger guys at the time, that were really pushing for an online presence and trying to do an online website for the lodge, and just really do a better online presence, so that way we could get more guys in that were of our mindset, that were willing to contribute. When I became master, I just realized there were not enough men, and there weren't really enough realized roles for men to fill. I created a kind of 6-pillar strategy that had subcategories or subcommittees for each pillar, that went through an entire, what I would call like life cycle of a successful lodge. And so if you're operating on all 6 of these, they kind of like naturally recycle each other. And so that way that you can continually build a lodge off of them. And so after my year, I just slowly worked at trying to implement the first 2 phases. And as those started working and we started getting more guys in, then I could train them up to do something within those phases, and I could go work on other things. So like the traditional offices of a lodge and the roles and charges, I fully support. I love the historical aspect of the craft. However, what I've been working to build with a lot of the guys in Hillcrest and the guys who have come through Hillcrest in the past, 7 years now, is really a much larger, much more complex system that's not just technology related. We've got everything from email managers that just put out email campaigns for us to guys who are just dedicated towards social activities. We've got people who focus more on charitable activities, and all of these things kind of domino together to continually increase the activity and the size of the lodge and the guys that can contribute back.
Okay, Kyle, have to ask, what are these 6 pillars? I mean, this is not the topic we brought you in for, but dude, this sounds golden. So
sure,
give it to us, man.
Yeah, and as a side note, so I'm also an officer in the 14th District MWSA, vice president this year. Chris Livingston is our current sitting president. And the guys who kind of brought us into that organization and helped us get elected into it also were very keen on the kind of leadership that we were building and the models that we were building. And so Chris is very supportive of my model. And we've been slowly starting to incorporate it over the past, really getting off the ground over the past year, but it's going to keep growing for the next few years. And the guys who are coming in behind us are starting to learn this model and help put together focused talks for it as well. So for anybody listening that's in the DFW area, if you can attend a 14th District MWSA event, we'll be going into these kind of subjects, like very, very deep detail, like at each specific meeting. But at a high level, the 6 pillars are communication, social, investigation, work, operational, and charity. And so each one of those has committees under them that support those efforts. So communication, getting your brand out there, getting awareness, making the initial contact, and setting up times for guys to meet you and your members. Social, obviously dominoes into that, setting up the activities that guys can come out to that aren't necessarily Masonic activities, but where you guys can meet as family and brethren and meet new inquirers and have them bring their wives so they can meet your wives and so forth and feel comfortable with it. Really put aside anything, any kind of connotation as us being a cult. Then, of course, that leads into needing investigation committees and really how to do those properly and having guys who can train guys how to do an investigation, because it really, the forms are fine, and we definitely need to cover everything that's on the form. Don't hear me say anything different than that. But that's really like the first part of the conversation. You need to know your guys way more in depth than that form to know if they're really going to be a good fit for your lodge, B, a good fit for Masonry in general, or anywhere in between. That's leading to guys not only to perform the degrees, but guys that can teach guys how to perform the degrees, and guys that can teach the candidates coming through the learned work, which is a little bit different. So that's multiple committees for all of that. Operational committees involve everything from investment and finance to building management, if you own your own building, to just general operations management. And then charity committee is something that kind of can come out of all that. Once your lodge is fully successful and able to operate on all these and bringing in guys, you're going to have guys who want to put together charity activities. And generally, as you get more and more guys, those are going to become larger and larger. I think that's really where if we're trying to be a charitable organization, which I think that's part of what we do, but not all of what we do, like you've really got to get enough guys in there to fully support that. And I think a lot of what this covers is somewhat the framework of how lodges work, but I think a lot of it is put on too many guys without enough kind of specific detail broken out to specific skill sets. So really operating within like one realm, like, hey, we're just going to do, and you can belong to multiple committees, but we're going to focus on work, but we're going to focus on teaching guys to do the floor work. We're not going to make the same guy who's teaching everybody to do the floor work also teach everybody how to do the Q&A and so forth. So, and a lot of this just gets bulked up underneath, roles and responsibilities of a secretary too much. Hey, send out the email for all of this. Hey, put together this paperwork for, building management or investment or whatever, and that's just too much on one person.
Tell me about it.
Oh, come on now.
Yeah, I think one of the things that leads to burnout is that the guys that get involved and are passionate suddenly get relied on too much, too often, all the time, and it just really kills them. So you like that diversity that you're talking about of having to rely on a whole network of people as opposed to just a select few is, that's pretty important.
Yeah. So, and I think that's really, a benefit of Masonry. You get the mentoring aspect, you get, true leaders that are able to teach not only managerial skills to others and younger men who might not have had that opportunity before, but are also then able to mentor them in true leadership, which I think is really what Freemasonry is about. And to do that, you have to have them have the ability to be free, which with, just the way the organization has structured itself over the past 70 years or so, it's not. We talk so much about rules and regulations that we forget about allowing guys to live the craft and to really enjoy it and to try things and experiment and try to grow their lodges without having to check the law book every time they want to do something. So and again, I'm not saying don't follow Masonic law, but it shouldn't be such a thing where we're worried about doing something positive for our organization and for our lodges, that we're going to get persecuted for it. So
that's a great way to put it. We shouldn't feel like we're being watched by the overlords. It should be one of those things that's encouraged, to where if you are doing something accidentally incorrectly, you get whispered good counsel and you make correction.
Yeah, and I think that I don't remember. It might have been on one of your podcasts a couple weeks ago. It might have been on the Texas Freemasons group, but somebody, it could have been you, but somebody was posting some Grand Lodge history as far as Masonic trials and them used to occurring at the lodge level a lot more frequently. Mm-hmm. And the real reason for those trials wasn't necessarily to, whip the guy or kick him out of the organization, but it was really just to say, hey, this is serious, pull yourself back in line, and then go about their business, but not kick the guy out of the organization. Now, I think if anybody gets brought up on a Masonic trial, it's almost assumed they're going to be out.
Yeah.
We don't do them off enough, and we do them with way too much severity, probably.
No, you're absolutely right, because it's funny, it'd be Masonic trials about somebody saying some cuss words or drinking too much, and they just brandish them a little bit, and then everybody go home and live their merry way. That's a good point. But I think those pillars are very insightful because, as you were talking about them, we didn't have the concept of that broken down in that manner, but our lodge in the last 3 years has grown, and it kind of followed that just organically. So it's a great way for a lodge to build because, we slowed down the investigation process. So we didn't have degrees to do for like 6 or 7 months while we were investigating guys. Mm-hmm. And we learned our degree work. And after 1.5 years, 2 years, we got a bunch of guys in there. And so we started doing charity projects just because there were so many guys, So this would be very interesting if you're in the area. I may have to make a trip out there.
Oh, we'd love to have you. Yeah, and I will say, as you're building these, for anybody listening that wants to implement something like this in their own lodge, as you're building these focus areas and kind of areas of excellence, as I try to call them, is you're going to hit stride in one of them, or maybe 2 of them, and that's immediately going to cause problems for the other ones. Like you said, you focused on the investigations, and that allowed you to focus on the work more. But then, of course, you didn't have anybody coming through, which, if your line was thin, might have created operational issues with the lodge and who was taking on certain responsibilities when you're not, or you could have various other problems. But we've gone through multiple cycles of this now. It's definitely inevitable that as we grow, there will continue to be growing pains. I think that's just the inevitable nature of any business organization. But yeah, our first time we did this, we got a flood of candidates in, even though we were making them wait, and then we were overloaded with doing the work. and we didn't have enough guys to do all the degrees all the time. So I think that initially created some burnout because we couldn't get guys the degrees when they were really ready for them.
That's crazy. I mean, it's almost our story exactly.
Yeah, as I've listened to the podcast and watched your posts on Texas Freemasons, I have see a lot of similarities between your lodge and Hillcrest. So
no, and I think it's awesome because I mean, none of us are promoting changing what we do in the craft, but how guys are joining and why they're joining is different than it was 40, 50 years ago, even 60, 70.
Yes.
And we have to listen. I mean, national treasure, like you say, I mean, that's the proof in the pudding.
Well, one common thread you're seeing is making it hard. Guys don't want to come join something where, it's ancient and it's secret. And I show up one night and I talk to two guys and here's my petition and now I'm a member. It kind of takes a lot of the fun out of it, at least for our generation, if it's not a challenge. Kyle, just out of curiosity, how many, since you guys started that investigative process, how many masters have you raised, just a ballpark?
Honestly,
yeah,
I mean, we've got 4 this year, like this Masonic year already. So now we're kind of like recently within the past like 8 months really restarting our online presence campaign, because not only do we make it harder to obtain the petition, obtain the signatures, because if you're getting 5 guys from Hillcrest to sign, they're going to know you. They're going to know at some level your philosophical beliefs, at some level your spiritual beliefs. They're going to know that they're not signing for an atheist, things along that line. So that adds to it. But when we got all these guys in, we made it more difficult for them to go through their work as well too. Like they really had to know it in and out, backwards and forwards, to the point where they really were ready to teach guys after they came through. Not saying that they had to know the questions like spick and span, but they could definitely teach themselves well enough to not get anything wrong. And part of that is because we tell our inquirers, that's what we call them, when they first come out and they're like, well, how much time is this going to take, or how much money is this going to take? We say, the monetary, the mandatory monetary amount is minimal. However, contributions are always welcome and encouraged. But on to the time period, it takes, if you break down what it takes an average lodge to get a guy from after all the inquiring stuff, after the petition, after the investigation, if you take a guy from the first time he knocks on the door to when he's raised as a Master Mason and has given that proficiency and that work, a lodge is going to spend, probably 60 to 75 man hours on that individual. And you can't have them go out with that debt and just turn away and not come back in and contribute. And so we say, hey, if you're going to join our lodge, you're only going to join our lodge initially. Eventually, feel free to go off and join other appendant bodies. We welcome that. I'm a member of Scottish Rite, York Rite, and various others. But initially, we really need you to reinvest in those that have invested in you, and we expect you, your first year to put back in, a sizable amount of hours. So
that's a great thing to tell them. 60, 70 hours, man hours. That's insightful as well. I mean, what a great way to break it down, because that's a lot of time.
Yep.
Not to mention the time that they're going to spend on their own in traffic or whatever, working on work or wherever they do, just on their own.
Absolutely.
So
no Kyle, what would you say is your favorite aspect of Masonry and why?
Well, so I have become, when I graduated college, I never wanted to leave college. I was a huge philosophy buff, loved reading, loved arguing. I still love arguing. Since college, I've become addicted to business. So I would be partially lying if I didn't say I really enjoy, bringing these guys in and mentoring them and teaching them different aspects of the business of running a lodge and how to do it and why and all that. But in my heart of hearts, I would also be lying if I didn't say, on top of the work, and the work is core to this because without it, you can't have this part. But it's generally the social fellowship we get after the work, where we get to go talk about it and talk about the meanings and the possible histories and things like that. Just the fellowship, specifically the type of fellowship that is shared in the exchange of those types of perspectives, is why I do everything.
It's a good one. I know there's been many cigar bars and backyard barbecues that I'll never forget.
Yeah.
So what would you say are the strengths and weaknesses of Masonry in Texas?
So I think the strengths are, the principles of Masonry. And that might sound like a cheesy, hokey answer, but I think if it's going to continue on as a successful organization, which I believe it will, we will have to stand by those kind of like bedrock, cornerstones. The weaknesses, I would say, of the organization, unfortunately, due to the lost generation, the Vietnam generation, we have lost a transition in leadership, and we've relied on operational models that are just honestly entirely out of date. We've created, massive amounts of law books for what should be probably policies and procedures that are now written in stone that we're eventually going to have to find a way to chisel around, which, might sound, scary to some, but no one in their right mind would run a local business, let alone an enterprise the size of Texas Freemasonry, on a business model created in the 1960s. Just no one would do that. You would absolutely be bankrupt if you try to do that today. And we are continually seeing the fruits of those labors. And so it's going to be a long path, and it should be slow changes because we shouldn't try to do things too much, and we shouldn't be changing the craft in any way. But the organizational model and how we handle certain things with inside our operations need to become more technologically proficient. They need to become faster. The biggest thing that gets me is Masonry, as we are taught, was basically built, to use a technical term these days, as a peer-to-peer network. It was a way in which operative Masons could go between borders, between legal barriers, and identify themselves and work together. And we have totally lost that. We are a total top-down system now that relies all communication to go through centralized resources, with really no visibility into each other and who we are and what we're doing. And I think we need a more distributed system for operating and for communicating and for talking. And that's really one of the reasons I created the Texas Freemasons group, 10 years or 11 years ago now, was I wanted to meet more guys. I hadn't served as master yet. I was really focused on Hillcrest. I didn't know a lot of other places I could go. Everybody wants a centralized calendar. Nobody had it at that time, especially. And, it was just, how do I find these other guys? So I with a couple other guys, started the Texas Freemasons group, and just kind of waited there. And it was slow growth for a while, but just waited there for people to start talking.
So was it just you initially starting it off, or I guess how many guys were involved in starting the Facebook group? So you said a couple other guys? Yeah,
so we had a couple guys from Lodge that we really just kind of toyed the idea off of. But we had another EA at the time. It was right after we changed our laws from 21 to 18. And he was the first 18-year-old that came through in the state. He'd actually wanted to join when he was 17. And he had some family that was in it and wanted to join when he was 17. And we told him, you got to wait till 18. And then that changed. So we called him back and said, if you want to come out and start meeting us, we're open to that. So as soon as he got in and became an EA, he was like, it'd be great as if we just use this really popular communication platform to try to find other guys to talk to on this, because we're also kind of geared up about talking about Freemasonry, but we don't have enough people to talk to. So his name was Tom Elliott as well too. He lives in Chicago now, but yeah, he was the other co-founder of that group.
Oh, that's really cool. So then, who is this Facebook group primarily geared towards?
Yeah, so the goal is for really regular and recognized Masons with inside Texas. And initially, of course, that was really geared towards any Mason underneath the Grand Lodge of Texas. And that has always included, although maybe not as well called out, EAs and fellow crafts. So if you're writing about stuff that EAs and fellow crafts aren't supposed to know about, I would prefer you not to on that group. And sometimes I even censor it, but that's generally, unless it's just something blatantly, non-Masonic, then I generally let it go. So.
Yeah, so you have employed maybe a little bit more of a laissez-faire style admin policy?
Yeah, so I'm a very free market kind of guy. So I like less governance whenever possible. And quite frankly, nobody's getting paid to do this. Not that I'm not happy to facilitate this in whatever manner possible, but it's definitely not anyone's primary job to be trying to govern everybody. And I don't think it should be anybody's job to try to govern everyone else. So especially in what they say.
Yeah. Don't tread on me, etc.
Yeah. Just free communication, as long as you're not breaking up.
So you mentioned it's primarily geared towards, regular Masons only. And so how does the moderator / admin team attempt to keep it to regular Masons only?
So the initial structure of it was I only invited people that I knew, and I started traveling to a lot of lodges in Dallas, and whenever I was out of town, I would try to turn people onto it, which was a lot easier after the iPhone came out. That grew us to probably maybe 1,800 people, I would say. Everybody was always encouraged to invite other people, and they can all go through and look through the membership request roster and approve people who have been trying to get in. So everybody in that regard is a moderator, and that they can admit someone in. It will also tell us if someone allowed someone in. So if we find someone that is a eavesdropper, we can escort them out, as well as start to investigate why they let someone else in. The person who let them in, investigate that person. But really, since the group at about 1,500 to 1,800 people, it kind of plateaued. I would say about 5 or 6 years ago. And then I don't know what happened, but we went from that to, I don't know how many we have today. I think it's 5,000 or something, 6,000. I should probably know that, but I haven't checked recently. But something happened, and it skyrocketed. People started inviting other guys. I think we might have gotten just a boost with inside the fraternity of younger men who were more familiar with how to use Facebook around that time period. And they really started probably networking together online in smaller groups. And as they found Texas Freemasons, I think it just kind of everybody started bubbling up and networking at the state level.
Cool.
No, and I think a lot of because I see a lot of the older generation getting on too. So it's kind of a simultaneous where, of course, the majority was younger guys joining. But there's a lot of guys on there that I'm surprised. I'm like, oh, wow, he's checking in.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting mix up and diversity there.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's it's kind of nice. So, but from a lot of the older guys, sometimes you see things like remember your obligations and stuff, and a lot of the younger guys are more like, come on, we're not really talking about anything sort of secret, but sometimes people do step out of bounds. What is, I guess, permissible to post in the Facebook group, and what is absolutely not? You already mentioned people should be kind of leery of writing things that aren't, inappropriate for EAs and FCs to see, but what's, I guess, more of a detailed take on that?
Yeah, let me actually back up to the last question real quick because I didn't say this and I do want to specifically call it out. Like, I think I alluded to it, but since we've, now officially recognized the Prince Hall Grand Lodge here in Texas and everything else, those guys are absolutely fully 100%, able to join and access the group and communicate with us. We have full rights to communicate with them. And so I just wanted to call that out to make that painstakingly clear, because occasionally we still have people who don't understand how those two jurisdictions are in alignment with each other now. So, anyways, thanks for letting me take that little.
No, that's an important point to make, because there's. I've talked to some brothers in person who still think that Prince Hall is clandestine, or that we're not recognized, or that they're not recognized, or whatever. And that's very much not the case, and it leads to some sometimes pretty ugly misunderstandings and ugly behavior. So it's important that you mention that.
Yeah,
definitely.
Back to your other question. You mentioned some guys saying things, be careful, remember your obligations. I would just say, entering this answer, that you also have to remember that what's secret today and what's not secret today isn't the same as what was secret, in this, 20, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, the craft has changed. It does change. My first couple years in, I went to what was called a warden's retreat then. And like, propositions were made as far as like what could be talked about. And I think they were starting to talk about bringing EAs into stated meetings at that point in time and things like that. I was just adamantly opposed to that. But that's just to illustrate that the craft does change. And, now it's like, well, if it's written down, it's fine. I think the original statement of if it's written down, it's fine wasn't for if it's written down anywhere. I think it was meant if it's written down by your jurisdiction and basically in monitorial form, it's fine, because, there's things written from different jurisdictions that are not.
No, I want to clarify on my previous statements. Everything that I'm doing is very much by the book in terms of Texas.
Yeah. But I mean, I've had, guys and leaders with inside Texas say, well, the only real secrets are the words and obligation. And I take strong offense to that. That's not my standpoint. That's not what I learned the secrets to be. But you've got, I think, a sizable block of Texas now thinking that kind of mantra and acting by it. And admittedly, I'm probably more conservative when it comes to the secrecy of the work and things regarding the secrecy of the work and the original intent of mouth to ear. But I'm not the final judge of this, and if somebody else is going to have a different opinion, that's fine too. But on that topic of mouth to ear, the alternative to that, to allude to it, would be one of the things that I do generally watch guys writing a line with on the group, because the intent of the law that was passed a couple years ago was for, as discussed at Grand Lodge, was for EAs and fellow crafts not to learn about it. And so when you publish about it in open forum where they're allowed to join, that's kind of violating the intent of that law. And again, I don't want to harp on laws and intents and getting guys scared to talk about anything, but I think that it should be something that we think about when we put stuff out there. Just because it's allowed doesn't necessarily mean it should be really voiced or advertised.
Yeah. Well, and kind of the way that I look at it in terms of secrets and things that have been published is that we basically don't have any true secrets anymore. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try and keep them, right? Because all the passwords have been published, and the grips there's been diagrams made of the grips and of the steps and everything like that. I mean, there's full. You can find full diagrams of lodge tactics if you wanted to, all online. But like you say, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't at least try and follow the spirit of that idea.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what's the biggest challenge you see on a regular basis as the moderator or as the admin / one of the moderators of the group?
Uh, probably not. Well, I was going to be in jest there, but probably not good form. Yeah, probably the biggest thing is just guys constantly not understanding who the group's intended for, like what we're talking about, and then really having to deal with, quite frankly, I'll just say it, like the occasional bigot. We do have those in the craft. I think they're on all sides from everywhere. I don't think that there's one group of people that don't have people who just have a super locked in worldview that are anti everybody else but them. And we're not a perfect group either. We definitely have those amongst our ranks, and just kind of like making sure that they're kept to a minimum, and that they don't go off trying to post anything that could potentially be associated with our group and our brand that could be screenshotted and put elsewhere.
So what's I guess, kind of a two-pronged question. What's the best thread or post you've ever seen in the group, and what's the worst thread or post you've ever seen in the group?
Yeah, I don't know. I love anything that's got me arguing. Like I said, I love to argue, and I mean it from the best way possible, not like red in the face like he did, but just like really making me think and like question what I'm saying and going back and forth with somebody. So the threads that generally get, 500, 600 comments on them are generally what I'm drawn to.
Expand to view previous comments. Yes, I will.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. If I see something and it looks like a remotely interesting conversation, and I go all the way. The first thing I go all the way back to the top of the post and start going through. Especially if it's something that looks like it could be heated. I do want to make sure everybody's kind of holding good form and doesn't need a direct message saying, "Hey, I understand, you're passionate about this, but remember your charges and let's get on down the road together."
See, I'm kind of the opposite on that one with you, Kyle. I spend a lot of time at work arguing with people. When I get on Facebook, I don't want to read any arguments, but every once in a while with that page, I'll see like 500 comments. I'm like, okay, all right, I got to sit down and read this. You just got to see what's going on, because you find some really different points of view in there sometimes. I mean,
oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
that's actually a great point. I think that so one of my early mentors in masonry was past Grandmaster Elmer Murphy. He's a member of Hillcrest, and one of his big first lessons to me was just the lesson of diversity with inside the craft that he had, experiencing his year in 2005 as Grandmaster, and just going all across the state and seeing, the different types of lodges and the different guys. And of course he had to do some of that even to get ready to be elected for that line. But back then he used to tell me, you got to drive all the state. You got to go visit as many lodges as you can. You've got to go shake hands and slap backs and, wear jeans and wear suits and everything else. And you got to get to know all these guys because they're truly great and they're truly unique. And that's absolutely true. And the beauty of, this group and technology is I've gotten to experience all that in my short term in masonry without having to drive nearly as far as he had to. But also appreciate that we truly are a coalition. There's no one Texas Masonry, right? There is no, we're a charitable organization, Texas Masonry. There is no we're a philosophical society, Texas Masonry. It is Texas Masons are a group of guys with diversified interests that come together across those differences to do bigger things. That is Texas Masonry. And, I think this group has been a prime channel to allow me and others to realize that and really truly embrace it. So
I think that's a great point, because a lot of times you see guys getting on the Facebook page to kind of proselytize what's working for them, and people get upset and it's like, oh, that'd never work out here. And it's like, well, of course not. We're not all supposed to be the same. Mm-hmm. We have gotten into that. It's a top down, tell us what to do, overlords kind of thing. And don't realize we got to come up with our own, because it's going to be unique for every area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I've had to make that clarification before in person, by not just online, but in person. Of hey, when I talk about things that my lodge does, I'm not saying that everybody should do this, and I'm not saying that other lodges have to do it or anything like that. But there's been a couple of times in person and online where I've had people, kind of take issue with my our lodge and with me. Because they think that I'm telling them what to do. And I'm like, no. Relax. This is not what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. And I think that directly plays into the work and the engagement level that we have with younger men with the work. We've standardized everything from an operational procedural perspective in the law book. And then whatever we can't write down, we kind of standardize in this like centralized authority of the Committee on Work, and I commend them for everything they do. We definitely need to preserve the craft, and we need to try to keep it as unified as possible. But we've got like an entire generation now that has been trained to tell the younger guys coming through, it has to be exactly this way. And some lodges will actually correct them on the floor during a degree, making in my opinion, a bigger slip of the intent of the degree than if you got a word wrong. Masonry, in my opinion, is something that's meant to be lived, and the work is meant to be lived, and it's not meant to be mandated. Like, guys aren't going to stick around to be mandated. Let them interpret the work. Sure, I mean, they need to learn, what they're supposed to be saying and where they're supposed to be saying it from. But if they occasionally put too much emphasis on something and get carried away and miss half a line or something, that's not going to end the world, and it's probably going to make for a better overall experience. So I think we need to take a more moderate stance in how we communicate how to perform the work, because it can't just literally be word perfect is perfect, because I've seen degrees that are as close to word perfect as anyone will ever see them put on by DIs and everything and former Committee on Work members, and they're just, in my opinion, and no offense, they're just not as meaningful as when I see a degree that's really put on with like everyone truly in character, everyone truly experiencing and living that role, putting emphasis into things, and just really getting into the moment. Those could have 15 or 20 blunders in wordmanship, and still everybody is just like in the room, like best degree I've ever seen.
Yeah. If you find the way to emotionally engage people, oh man, that's where it's at, And
when you come at it with some passion, instead of just like you're reading off a script that you've never done it before. Mm-hmm. Hello, my name is George. George likes lions. Lions are very pretty. Very pretty lions are very fun to pet. Like, it comes off wrong. But if someone's in there and he's into it, he's feeling it, he has it in his heart.
It's infectious.
Man, it's infectious. And there are some guys in our lodge that really, really have the skill for that. I like to do my work in the South because I'm not great at that, but I can get into it a little bit, and not have a whole lot to screw up, but let those guys really get into the thing. So I totally agree that sitting there and having guys just read, have to be word perfect is not the way to do it.
And sure, like after the degree, the members who want to do the corrections can go to the committee meetings at different times for instruction, and they can course correct on what happened last time. But when you're celebrating, entering someone into the craft or passing them or raising them, those are not the times, even afterwards, to like go and say, well, you got close, you almost did it, here's this, and be nitpicky. That's just removing away from the total moment, which should happen, that entire day as long as the brethren are together, right? They should be retiring for refreshment afterwards, probably going to a restaurant, maybe grabbing a drink or two, like talking about it, really experiencing it and throwing around ideas, and not sitting here thinking about like, well, Joe Smith came up to me afterwards and said, and nitpicked on this and that. And it's like, Okay, Joe Smith is missing the point, and
Yeah.
I'm using an anonymous name there. There's nobody in my example actually named Joe Smith for all legal clarity. But
No, we did a fellowcraft degree where we tried something interesting, and there's nothing illegal about it or anything like that, but it wasn't quite something that people had seen before, and one of the past masters stood up and he said, "Oh, I don't know about the degree was concluded and everything like that, and we were about to close lodge. Have you anything for it?" And that got brought up before we closed and everything like that, and it was just kind of like, all right, we want to get home, we want to go out for a couple beers or whatever, and let this guy digest his degree, and we didn't really get the opportunity to get to that faster. Because this guy wanted to chew us out. But so kind of moving on to the next subject, with specifically more social media oriented, how do you see social media playing out in Masonry today and then tomorrow?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So first off, I want to be very clear when I talk about social media. I'm not just talking about like Facebook and Twitter. Or any of the other hundreds of various different social channels. But I'm also including about, owned social media platforms that you literally own, like blogging, which is a large part, most websites for content now. So keep that in mind as I use the term social media. It's a very it's a large ecosystem, rather than just talking about like, hey, we've got a Facebook page or hey, we've got a Facebook group or anything like that. So that being said, though, I absolutely think that social media is imperative to the future growth of the organization overall, and more so, it's imperative to any particular lodge being able to be competitive and relevant. Unless you've got a lodge which is highly networked, that has a lot of what I would say, leaders with inside the community already in it who can, through their natural display of themselves in the community, draw people up to say, hey, what's this thing you're a part of? And yes, I want to join. Social media, and again, primarily your website, is going to be where your lodge is going to live and die. Ultimately, it's going to generate 99% of interest in your lodge. And if your lodge doesn't have a blog, for instance, if your lodge doesn't own its Google business, so it can control its representation on Google Maps, then if your lodge is around other lodges, the other lodges will take all the membership. So it's not necessarily going to generate the interest in Freemasonry. I think that the Freemasonry is observably out in the world today. And I think that'll continue, but it is how you catch it. So does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah, that's pretty comprehensive. What would you say are the absolute don'ts of social media behavior when it comes to, I guess, individual conduct and as a person, as a Mason, maybe even as like a lodge page or something like that? The total don'ts. Don't do this.
Yeah. So number one don't is don't not utilize it. And that's not just from don't not set something up, but don't set something up and then leave it. If you set something up as your primary contact point, like a Facebook page, and then no one ever posts anything on there, if somebody searches Facebook for lodges, yours probably won't be the first that comes up if you're not posting regular updates. Likewise, if somebody does find your Facebook page for your lodge and messages you on there, but you don't have anyone in your lodge that regularly checks that Facebook page, then you have people that are basically seeing Masonry as a dead organization that doesn't want to reach out. So don't do those things.
I've noticed Facebook now will tell you how fast someone usually responds.
Mm-hmm.
So, they get on there and they see they usually respond in 3 days. Well, to the generation right after ours, and Kyle, I'm not sure how old you are, but I kind of guess like early 30s, somewhere right in there. So kind of rather, no, you told us how old you are. anyways, I missed that part. Moving
pretty
on.
close.
Yeah. The generation after us, if you're not responding in an hour, they've forgotten about you. I mean, it really works like that. So you got to have someone on it if you really want to use it to drive membership. I know a lot of what we do with Facebook is keeping our current membership engaged. It makes a big difference keeping everyone together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've got a contact form on our website, for instance, which is where we really try to funnel everyone to make initial contact point. And on that form, when they submit something to us, we have it set up so it will automatically send them an email to the email address they list. We list it's kind of generic, so they know if they get something at 3:00 in the morning, we don't have somebody just always watching like some sort of conspiracy theory. But it does kind of say, hey, here's some things you might want to think about. Here's some different blog articles you might want to read about the process and what we're about and joining and things like that. Just anything you might have general high level questions on. And it just says, sincerely, the guys from the lodge, not exact verbatim, but that's the gist of it. And then from there, we've got a CRM system hooked up, a customer relationship manager that we've got a few different members that monitor. And we'll go in and actually answer follow-up questions. But in the initial email, we do say, hey, this is a nonprofit organization. We aren't, staffed to do this full time. So it will generally take, 2 to 3 days for someone to actually reach out to you and give you an actual contact. But in the meantime, here's all the stuff you can read.
No, that's great. I know on Facebook, if your response time is low, your Facebook page doesn't come up when they search it.
Right.
So it's important to respond on many levels. And
that was something that kind of when I got for access to our lodge's Facebook page in like its inbox for the first time, I was actually super surprised because we really hadn't been doing a whole lot with the messaging system. And so we had some guys that got an auto reply, it was like little square and compasses auto reply and like, hey, like somebody will be with you shortly. And then like nothing for months. And I'm just going, oh my gosh. So I spent a couple of days, like when I first got access to it, just replying to people that had not been replied to in a long, long time. And so some of them I just never heard back from. And, but overall it was nice though, because it bumped our rating up because it was something like, this lodge usually replies in 72 hours or whatever. And like it came up, we were able to bump it up to within 1 day. So that was better. So
Kyle, what CRM do you use? Do you know the name of it?
Oh yeah. So I generally set up all the technologies and test them out, since I do that a lot professionally. And so we're using a option which I think is really great for lodges. We've actually implemented it with the Grand Lodge as well, to some extent, and worked that with our membership committee a little bit, which we could talk about more later. But it's the HubSpot CRM, which is actually a free solution as long as you're not using all of its bells and whistles, and as long as you don't need very large teams on, which Masonic lodges generally don't. So we found it to be a really great solution that kind of keeps track of the centralized conversations, and we've got it set up so that way, even if they route through email or whatever else in communicating with us, it'll capture those conversations and move them into the CRM so we can see their entire history. And plus it tracks like all of their movement on our website. So we'll see what pages they've gone to, what sources they came from, if they came from Google or if they came from Facebook or anything else. It kind of gives you like a long, almost like a profile feed in Facebook that you can just kind of scroll through and see everything that they've done as they've interacted with your brand.
Oh, that's super cool. I like that.
Yeah. Does it have app capabilities where you can log in on your phone and all that kind of stuff?
They do have apps. I haven't used those that often. When they first came out, they were a little shaky. I think they've improved them since then. However, I have been focusing on, building other areas now. So we've got some other members who are largely handling the CRM rather.
No, that's a great idea. I mean, of course, if you have, 3 or 4 candidates come through a year, you don't necessarily need a CRM. You should be able to track that. But, at any given time, we may have 8 or 9 candidates coming in, and it's like, has that guy been coming up for 6 months or 4 months?
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
That's the danger zone.
Yeah, and that needs to be lodged.
have.
That needs to be like lodged data where you have multiple members who can manage that level of communication, because it can't grow if you've just got the secretary answering the phone and then him logging everything. He can only see his stuff, right? So, for instance, I mean, we've grown our visibility, and keep in mind, like, inquirers cover a lot of tiers. So, in sales and marketing, you would typically have like marketing leads and qualified leads. And I think with Inside Masonic inquirers, you have something similar. You definitely have inquirers who want to ask a question or two, and also probably the conspiracy theorists and things like that aren't really serious about joining. And then you've got the very serious inquirers. But in any given month, as we've scaled up, we're currently seeing probably, I would estimate, 30 to 40 inquirers a month. So we definitely got to the scale where we needed to be able to contact people much more frequently, have people see like total thread conversations, so that way somebody else could follow up, have multiple people know how long they've been coming around, see what they've been invited to, see what stage they are in our, it's not a recruiting process, but I'm going to use that word so everybody can understand that it's kind of like the inquirer process. We've got multiple stages. They've hit this milestone, they get logged as this, now they're probably ready to start having these kind of conversations, that kind of stuff.
Cool. So, jumping in a slightly different direction, how do you feel about brothers that, there's two contexts for this. How do you feel about brothers posting stuff like religious, political, etc. in Masonic Facebook groups? And how do you feel about guys that are very visibly brothers, maybe they have the square and compass profile pic or whatever, posting about religion and politics and other possibly inflammatory things outside of Masonic Facebook groups?
Okay, so
it's kind of two questions. Yeah,
definitely complex. So I'm generally not the kind of guy who's square and compasses everywhere. So for me, I mean, seeing square and compasses as profile pics in the first part, that's a little over the top, and I think honestly a little bit different than where we need to be focusing. We need to be out in the community, but again, the community is online, and I understand that having your profile might get someone to, want to contact you. Being the administrator of this group and the size that it is, I have people from around the world contact me on how to join. But that being said, different topic. But I'm just not a big fan of having the square and compasses there. But I definitely am not a big fan of using your square and compasses profile pic if you're going to be making political rants all day. Now, keep in mind that's coming from someone who is very focused in political theory for fun a lot. And I love to post things about politics, but I would also, up until recently, actually, my Facebook presence has been largely non-Masonic, other than private groups that I've got set up. So that way I can have kind of my Masonry in Facebook through that path.
Yeah, a little bit of separation there always is helpful. I often check in publicly and stuff like that on my lodges and chapter and whatever. But as far as, I try not to post a lot of political stuff and everything like that. It's just if I'm going to be presenting one aspect of myself, I'd rather present just one, not multiple.
Yeah. Now that being said, to your other question about like posting political and religious topics with inside Facebook groups, I think that for like Masonic Facebook groups, I think that is a much more complex situation. I see far too many posts that are quite frankly disturbing to me from guys that want to totally disassociate membership from any form of cultural activity, whether it be political or religious or any of those facets. Just because Masonry tells you that we're trying to find the best men to work together, emulate the beehive, all this kind of stuff, and we're not supposed to be talking about religion or politics in lodge, which I agree with. That doesn't mean you're supposed to, as a Mason, not talk about religion. And if it is, like, I'm in the wrong organization, because I think that, I look back to times of, Franklin and Washington,
There you go.
The founders of our state.
They were very much all about that. Yeah.
They had to be, right? And it's like, you can't tell guys that they can't talk about religion and politics in a Facebook group, at least as I feel, to an extent, as long as they're being respectful, because the Facebook group is not a tiled lodge, and it never will be. Like, it's not even an owned platform. Like, even if we owned the platform, it would still be all sorts of, writing and indicting, and that can't be tiled. And so whatever goes on there has to be how you would just normally live in the public at a restaurant or a bar or anywhere else, and having the same rights and liberties that you would have wherever. It's you're not meant to not talk about politics and religion with your brothers ever. That's my opinion on that, but I don't think our country could have formed if that was ever the design intent of that rule. And I'm not even entirely sure if that rule existed back then, because of how dominant politics was with inside Masonic structures.
No, when people say that, it makes me want to find a harbor to throw some tea in, because it's crazy to think that you gather some of the most intelligent men, this is what Masonry should be doing in society, and then tell me I can't have a conversation about politics or religion with them, because these guys might actually change my mind. So you have to be able to discuss it, and the thing you can't do is be divisive. You could be on opposing ends, and only term I know is argument. You just got to use the proper rhetoric when you're doing that, because that's fun. That's the fun part.
Absolutely.
Go for it.
No, go ahead.
I guess my objection to, and this is not to politics and religion being discussed by Masons or near or adjacent Masonic concepts, because I do think we should be talking about religion, politics, things that matter. My problem with politics and religion being posted in Masonic Facebook groups is that it often tends to be Facebook-level discourse regarding politics and religion. And Facebook-level discourse of those subjects is often heinously bad.
I do not disagree with that. I do think that those need to be kind of monitored and mentored, but I also look at it as just a great learning experience for everyone. It gives you the visibility to see again, the diversity within inside the craft. I think a lot of guys are really surprised when they get in to find out there are so many guys on the other side of the aisle from their viewpoint. I think they initially come in and meet so many guys that are agreeable, and they assume that their worldviews and political views are the same, and they're oftentimes not. I would guess to say that we're actually probably pretty evenly divided in that, from what I've seen in the conversations I've had, in one-on-one. But that being said, when I was taking religious studies courses in college, I wasn't studying for theology. I wasn't studying to become a priest or a minister or anything else. And I learned about many different types of religions from an objective standpoint. And, they're really symbols and meanings within inside what they were talking about. And so that was a large part of what brought me to Freemasonry. And if you think about it, like, everything that we refer to as a symbol is a symbol in a holy book. Like, if you really want to try to figure out what the symbols mean, go find the symbols and then research your book of faith. And historically, that would have, been a Christian Bible, but very specifically types of translations for Christian Bibles, if you want to find them all. And those symbols have context within those. And that's why we have books of faith on the altar. And when we're talking about these symbols, it's supposed to be, in my opinion, within context of their original viewpoint. But just because I have a presentation on what those symbols are in a biblical context does not mean I'm telling you what you should believe, right? It's a very different conversation. It's just, hey, here's a historical perspective on what certain groups of people at certain times in the 16th and 17th century thought about,
subject,
Masonic symbol X, Y, or Z.
So you mentioned... go for it, Rick.
Well, I was going to say, you said perspective, and I think that's important to point out, because a lot of time in these conversations, going in, there's just a snowball chance that somebody's going to change your mind. But you you need to realize you're going to get perspective on the issue, and there's wisdom in that. So, engage it in the proper way, and let's have a discussion about whatever hot political topic is out there and figure out how, we can come to a consensus, because Masonry's had a big part in society from the beginning, and it's high time we get involved again,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And without those kind of discussions, we'll never get there. So let's practice. We're gonna ding up a lot, because I'm with you. A lot of times I see them posted. It's like I might post just enough to get notifications to follow it, But
yeah, I mean, and you're not going to have a success case out of every conversation. Mm-hmm. So you're definitely going to have people who are just going to walk away disagreeing and not really live the true core tenets of Masonry, and that's going to happen, and that's fine. But I think the larger thing is more people can see the discord and see the different perspectives and realize there's differences and come back with a cool head and learn how to live better together. And honestly, I think our country is so divided right now, and there's a lot of theories as to why that is, but I really truly believe that one of the reasons of that is a direct correlation with the decline of Masonry in America. The more we decline as a society or a sub-society, the less infrastructure that America has for a middle ground. There's less of a system in place where people can come together and learn to view opposite opinions and perspectives and really still decide, hey, at the end of the day, we're going to work together. So, and that's a core lesson with inside Masonry that most adults in our society are not taught to learn anymore, and they don't have anywhere else to go.
No, and I think that's nail on the head. That's something we're missing big time, is that we don't have to agree, but we got to work together. And Masonry teaches that.
So, Kyle, you mentioned earlier that, Facebook is not a tiled environment and it'll never be. And that kind of, I already kind of know what your answer on this one is going to be, but what is your take on digital lodges like the one that the UGLE has? It's a lodge that is basically what we're doing right now on Discord, that they meet via webcams and audio calls. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I would honestly, and this would probably be seen as an extremist point of view in this day and age and kind of ruffle some feathers, but I would say that it's not a traditional organization that is observing the ancient landmarks of Freemasonry.
Fair enough. No. I feel, and that's, I had a discussion with one brother that said that, if it's using proper encryption and everything like that, it's tiled, and maybe, but I don't know that I buy that. So.
Nope. Yeah, I can tell you, I mean, working in technology, and let me be clear, I probably sound like a conspiracy theorist to even some other technologists, but yeah, if you even read anything about what the United States government was.
No, let's be real. Like the NSA is listening to everything we do. Like that one.
Well, not necessarily listening, but it's definitely decoding and categorizing and making algorithmic assumptions and putting that with some sort of profile. I mean, you can go look at anything on the Prism and Edward Snowden and all that stuff. And I'm not taking one side or the other with that, but there was a lot that got leaked out in that time period as far as their capabilities and what was confirmed as happening that kind of got swept under the rug and hasn't really resurfaced. But they've pivoted some of their technologies, but they haven't changed their intent. And yeah, there's nothing secure online. Not necessarily saying somebody's listening to everything, but there's nothing secure online. If somebody was in the right position and wanted to, they could go access any information that you could put out on any digital content. Plus, it's a direct, anybody who argues for this just really doesn't fully understand how technology works, because, if you're worrying about an encryption level, you're worrying about things that have been in some form imprinted, whether that's electronically or on magnetic tape or whatever else.
About who can find it. It's about the fact that it was put down in the first place.
It's like because
what about that obligation?
I can't go into that much more without actually starting to talk through the obligation. So we'll pass off that, but everybody should understand that.
So I was going to ask on this internet lodge, because I've heard of it before. Is it only by affiliation, or do they do the degrees online?
You have to be it's only by affiliation, and you have to be a member of the UGLE in order to join in. So they don't do degrees or anything like that, because I mean, or at least to my knowledge, they don't do degrees because you can't really confer degrees over the internet on a digital candidate. But it's a affiliation lodge. But I thought it was an interesting sort of idea. And even though I don't necessarily agree with it in the first place, but I'm sure there's guys that agree with it and would say that I'm wrong for disagreeing with it. But
so with that understanding, because I might not fully have a good view of it as well. Like, I wouldn't say that's anything wrong. Like, if you're meeting together online to talk about the business of your lodge or your organization, I think that's fine, as long as you're not trying to get around some sort of like encryption argument about how you can, teach people to work through typing it out or talking about the degrees specifically, because it's in some sort of quote unquote secure environment. Yeah. But I mean, if it's operational, a lot of the stuff like we've talked about earlier in this show, those are things that I have been working on to incorporate into an operational model for Masonry. But it's not Masonic secrets, and those things could be, discussed in a chat forum or Skype or anything else, and I wouldn't have any problem with that.
Yeah.
In fact, that's kind of what I built.
The premise is not. I think the premise is sort of kind of flawed, though. But
yeah.
So, digital connections. Do you feel like they often lead to in-person connections, or does that not happen as often as you think it might?
It's how we met, right, Kyle?
Yeah, I think so. Honestly, I don't even remember like how.
The first time we met in person was at Grand Lodge at Crickets or whatever that was, the bar afterwards.
Oh yeah.
2 or 3 years ago, but we had talked through Facebook several times.
Okay, I thought we had met before that, but I could
maybe we did. Maybe it was at Wardens and Secretaries, because I come to that once a year when we do the joint.
Yeah. That could, I think that was it, but I don't know. We'll get down a tangent trying to chase that origin story. Yeah. So, I'm sorry. What was the question? Like, do real bonding?
Yeah. No, yeah. I think that actually, to a certain extent, that was kind of an answer. It's like, hey, like you guys met online, but you guys met each other in person later on. Because I was just kind of wondering, like we meet a lot of other Masons online, whether it's through the Facebook group or whether it's through like a weird, like a shared tag on Instagram or something like that, and people start talking to each other. But how many times does that turn into like real life in-person sort of interactions? And now that I'm thinking about it, it might not be the right question to ask anyway, because digital relationships serve a different purpose than in-person relationships. But
yeah, and I think they can facilitate some, but it's kind of like, it's almost like dating or something. You're gonna kind of meet a bunch of people online, but that's not all kind of person relationships, because there is something different about holding and maintaining an in-person relationship. You can't just say, "Oh, well, I've got to go make dinner now," or "I've got to do this," and it's a much more dedicated process to want to meet up with people in person. However, that being said, we've got a lot of things going on, like on the group that we saw last year. I think Robert was on your podcast a few weeks ago, if I remember right. And, the big Waco party they're starting to try to do annually now down at Grand Lodge. That's something that I think is a great kind of transitional system to where, okay, well, we all know each other online and we're all going to be in the same place. So now we're going to do an offline event together. And then that event is probably going to lead to some real offline relationships that are going to strengthen the group, and more guys will try to make an effort to come down there every year, because now they're meeting friends that they're only going to see once a year, which I really hope is a growing trend, because I think we need more guys of our mindsets, showing up and voting and kind of talking about different subjects on the floor.
No, and I wish we could bottle up those evenings after Grand Lodge to give everybody a little taste, because once you get a feel for the networking that goes on there, and of course, Grand Lodge is of the utmost importance, but that networking afterwards is what keeps me motivated going.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Like I've been going down every year for 10 or 11 years. And this last year, over the past few years, I've really started to network out in other parts of the states with just guys of similar interests. And we rented a house down in downtown Waco this year, and so we didn't get to make a lot of the other events, but we invited a lot of the guys over, and we're going to do that again this year. In fact, we're hoping to do it even bigger because we're having basically, late night philosophical hours between all the statewide esoterics coming over, having some scotch and drink and smoking cigars and staying up entirely too late to be at session early in the morning.
God.
But it was a good time.
I'm having Whataburger based flashbacks to when I was in college.
If you don't make it to Whataburger, it was not an event.
Yeah.
That's true.
You finish at Whataburger.
Yeah. So, Kyle, what do you think about lodges using for like fundraising programs? A lot of times we talk about fish fries and, clay shoots and stuff like that. What do you think about like for, like a scholarship fundraiser or just some whatever fundraiser using crowdfunding like Kickstarter or GoFundMe or just general calls to donate to PayPal or something like that? What's your take on lodges doing that?
Yeah. So, one of our core tenets is charity, and I'm all for us being philanthropic. I do want to distinguish that I don't think that we are at core a philanthropic organization, but that should be a natural product of what we're building out of Masonry. So I'm all for guys creating fun drives and fundraisers. The state is pretty spread out on how they do that and what boards they've got to centralize this right now. And I've been working with some people to hopefully help identify how we can do this in the future. The MWSA is actually working on a water drive right now for the Hurricane Harvey disaster relief program. So we're getting together stuff for that. We've had some fairly sizable commitments on that, so hopefully we're able to make an impact. But I don't think that charity should be the core focus of what a lodge is there to do. If you're there just putting through the degrees and kind of laughing through them, and then saying, well, we are involved in our community because we're doing all these charitable activities. That's great for the charitable activities part, but it's really a downer that your members aren't really fully experiencing or understanding why they're doing that, or any of the other parts of Masonry that aren't charity specific. Because there's a lot of areas of Masonry that's just not it's not charity. There's many other areas that, how do I say this, that are kind of core areas of building a man and thinking through the process of Masonry that have nothing to do with charity.
We're a lot more than that.
Yeah, no. Exactly. It's a part of what we do, but it's not part of what we do, but it's not the whole. But I would say for those lodges that are charity focused, that's great. Keep up the good work. Definitely be visible in your community that way. But to get back on topic of social media, if you're doing that and then you're not maintaining a website, posting your results of that and really getting out in the online community and showing what you're doing, you're losing a major impact that you could be having for community visibility. Because showing up at any kind of charitable drop-off space or blood drive is only going to impact the hundreds or maybe thousands of people that see that. But having that as part of your content catalog online of what you've done for when people who are searching Freemasonry in your area and want to see if you're active and do want to contribute and do want to be the members that focus on charity, you're missing out on those guys because they're not seeing that as something they can skim through on your website as something that you do.
Yeah,
sure. Well, and one thing I see is lodges that are friends with, their city Facebook page or their neighborhood Facebook page. Those cities and neighborhoods will then share the post, and so you get exposed to everyone who is attached there. So you don't want to come off like you're bragging, but let people know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So appended bodies, do they need to use social media more or less than Blue Lodges do?
So I would say probably in different ways. They would probably actually be more beneficial from using like entrenched groups and Facebook pages and things like that. Having a specific website for the Scottish Rite, for instance, I think would be minimal, right? Because they're not going to be able to get members just directly off the street. They have to get members from their lodges. And most of their lodges are probably going to be familiar with those groups from the members that are already in that organization. But if they can provide like a group specifically for their members where their guys can discuss kind of away from the rest of the organization, that's a plus. It gives guys kind of like another reason to want to join. It's kind of that whole secretive elitist thing that Lance was talking about a few weeks ago. It's like, hey, okay, well, I want to know what they know, and I want to be able to talk about what they talk with them, and I want to be able to network at that more citywide is the wrong word, but more inter-lodge level.
Well, that makes sense. Kind of one of the sections that I kind of tacked on last minute that I wanted to ask about is being safe on social media. What do you think are some risks, I guess, as individual Masons or as like lodge pages or something like that you could see arising from using social media?
Sure. Yeah. And we've got this problem already. We've experienced it many times, which has kind of set us up for creating like a safety protocol process for inquirers. Is once our website really got to the point of being the top result for most search terms in the Dallas area, we started getting the crazies in large numbers, right? We started getting the guys who are talking about conspiracy theories and how God's talking to them, or Jesus says this is wrong. And you don't always see that in the first email. Some of them are really trying to play it cool, or
you got the
really
crazies.
Con you. Yeah, the smart ones are definitely trying to con you into meeting up. And we've had some guys that really ask for some really strange kind of terms in which to meet up on. And it's led us to basically say, hey, we really need to meet guys off-site first. So we had a social that we started, a monthly social every month. It's only for members and guys members, family members, and inquirers that want to inquire more about Freemasonry and potentially joining our specific lodge. So that being said, we had that going on for probably about 6 months and started getting a really strange chain of emails from a particular individual. And then someone had, I think by accident, invited him to our stated meeting dinner.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so after that point, we made it very clear that no one that's inquiring comes to the lodge. Like, I know most lodges think the biggest thing to do is get everyone in their lodge that they possibly can. I'm going to say this publicly, like, we support the mandated the open house days, but those are by no way safe, and definitely not safe for our lodge. And so we really downplay those, but we do those every month. We just do them off-site, and we do them in such a way that we can kind of weed out through communications, emails, and phone calls who we invite to those first, so that way we can make sure that they're truly interested and not, yeah, I'm interested, and by the way, Jesus says that this is all wrong and you're going to hell and everything else. So,
or like, hey guys, I want to join the Templars and protect the holy bloodline of Mary Magdalene or whatever, Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I'm quite seriously more concerned about someone with a knife or gun who does want to do something drastic.
There was that incident up north, and now I was gonna get somebody correcting me on this. I was either in Minnesota or Michigan, and I think it was in Michigan, where they had a couple guys that got invited to the lodge, and had, seen the lodge room and were introduced like, hey, like this guy sits here and this guy sits there, and like all of our guys usually sit on this side of the room, and all of this stuff like that. And then it turns out that one of the guys who was kind of pushing forward with this plan, it was two guys, but one of them was the one orchestrating things. The guys that they'd been introduced to the lodge were planning a attack on the lodge. And it turns out that I think it was the FBI or the CIA was trying to set them up to find more terrorists that would, comply with all of this. So they were using them as like plants. And so they said, well, you should totally attack this lodge. And they had purchased automatic weapons, and I think that one of them had a grenade and everything like that. And they knew the layout of the lodge. They knew where people sat. They knew how to get into the building. They knew how many people guarded the doors, that kind of stuff. And it's terrifying. So that stuff you're saying about the open house being a huge safety risk, absolutely. It's totally true, because we just let whoever in the building.
Yeah, and that's kind of going back to that culture of like, hey, everything's okay. We're perfectly fine. We'll tell you everything you want to know. And that's no, that's the charges specifically say don't do that. You're like supposed to be totally, down the straight and narrow. If anybody says anything about the fraternity, just basically don't respond is kind of the charge.
Yep.
To paraphrase. And then B, it's just a total safety nightmare. You don't want to let people you don't know, which goes in the whole petitioning process of like, some of these guys are willing to slap a petition in their face and like sign it, who might be trying to kill you. Like that's a serious problem with inside the organization that we've gotten to that point with some members. We've had messaging so negative and so bad for so long that members are willing to just totally not think about the process anymore to do this.
You end up with Jedi Ninja Warrior. We had a Jedi Ninja Warrior, but we were able to weed him out. So that was good.
Yeah.
No, and I think guys need to realize in a big metropolitan area, you have to have these in place, because this is a perfect example of where Masonry has changed in recent years. Because it dawned on me that the guys coming in from the internet, nobody knows anything about. And in the 50s and 60s, anybody that joined, they knew him.
Yeah, like they knew you growing up,
Yeah, or at least had a general idea of you. And if you just moved in town, which was rare, you weren't petitioning the lodge right off the bat. You had to know somebody to get you in, and it's not the case anymore. So that's another thing that just naturally happened in our lodge, where we were like, we had a crazy try to join, and we were like, you know what, we're not going to have them meet where we meet. Of course, we're in a temple, so we have
ours is a big, large, obvious building, and so we've gotten bomb threats and stuff like that before. It's kind of scary.
We had a guy. We're the exact opposite of that, and this is probably one of the scariest things we've ever had happen, because we're down in an old quarry, 30 feet below street level, in a fairly upscale neighborhood that's kind of grown up around us. And one day we were down there for practice, and this guy just walks in the door. This was within the past year. Crazy. And he just walks in the door. And our lodge building looks kind of like a larger house. And so, no knock, no nothing, just walks in the door. He obviously knew where we were located from online, and started talking to us about stuff. And he sounded on the up and up for about 5 minutes. And then he started saying some things that very quickly spiraled into, okay, this guy is not not quite all there. Lost a couple marbles short, kind of thing. We proceeded to get him out as early as possible, and that's when we started very blatantly on the website saying visitations to lodge are specifically by invite only, so they would have to reach out to us first. So
that's a good point.
Should we even be publishing our addresses? Is that something that you is?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I think
we don't really have a choice anymore, right? That gets published for us.
Well, not only that, but there's you're going to have to take risks if you're going to be a successful business, right? That's the case for any business at any stage they're ever in. They're always taking some form of risk, or they're not growing, and the inverse of that is they're dying. If you chain yourself off from too many risks for too long, you're not going to be successful. And I think that's one of the areas that, unfortunately, that is information that most people need to know, and most people are good people with that information. And and the other part is, you're right. You really don't have that much control of it, so you might as well control what you can of it.
Well, and you just put in the proper procedures, because if you are a lodge that gets a lot from the internet that nobody knows, put your procedures in place. Because if you're a small lodge like yours, well, building wise, meet them somewhere else. We've got a little room right as soon as you walk in the door, a meeting room, to where you see nothing but basically the door. And they don't make it past there until after a couple of meetings, and they get the nod from everybody. It's like, okay, he's not crazy. And there's a lot of things you can do. And that all is part of our investigation process. There's no reason why that has to be quick, and there's no reason why it should be, actually.
Yeah.
Care how much you're hurting.
It's really nice when we can kind of just sit back and let our guests go a little bit when they have a bunch of smart people things to say. Very nice.
Yeah, it's always good to lean on the guests. But hey, it's been good having you, man.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite, and it was a blast doing this, so I appreciate being on.
Well, and if I've learned one thing, it's that we have to have you back on to talk more in depth about these 6 pillars. I think that's something crucial lodges need to know, and they can grow from.
Sure. I think it could be a good 2-hour conversation on these 6 pillars. I mean,
Well, I thought this podcast was going to turn into that for a minute. I
was kind of hoping it would, man. And Kate's over here saying, no, we're going back to the outline, right now.
I'd have to retitle it.
I'm happy to come back on whenever you guys would like to have me. That's something I'm definitely passionate about, and would be happy to share with whoever's willing to listen.
Cool. Yeah.
Awesome. We'll plan on it then. That's great.
Sounds good.
This week's fraternal quote is, "These thoughts, my dear friend, are many of them crude and hasty, and if I were merely ambitious of acquiring some reputation in philosophy, I ought to keep them by me till corrected and improved by time and further experience. But since even short hints and imperfect experiments in any new branch of science, being communicated, have oftentimes a good effect in exciting the attention of the ingenious to the subject, and so becoming the occasion of more exact disquisitions, as I before observed, and more complete discoveries, you are at liberty to communicate this paper to whom you please, it being of more importance that knowledge should increase than your friend should be thought an accurate philosopher." And that is by the Right Worshipful Brother Benjamin Franklin, past Grand Master of the Right Worshipful Grand Lodge of the most ancient and honorable fraternity of free and accepted Masons of Pennsylvania and Masonic jurisdiction thereunto belonging, and a letter that he wrote to Brother Peter Collinson in September of 1753.
Smart guy.
Yep. But it's I love that quote because it that really does kind of play into what we're talking about today about social media and communication and everything like that. Like, you can't sharpen yourself unless you're talking. You have to communicate because we can't grow in a vacuum. And so that's one of the things that we're facilitating with social media and with groups like Texas Freemasons. So it's good stuff.
Absolutely. It's also kind of a legalese excuse to say, hey, here's my thought right now. It's what I believe right now, but bound by this in the future. Go ahead and circulate that if you want. Which I think is a perfect representation of what generally gets posted on there. So
it's fantastic.
I'm gonna say it, but if someone disagrees with me too much, y'all be ready for that.
Yeah. Gentlemen, closing thoughts on tonight?
It was beyond awesome. I really enjoyed it. I can't wait to listen to this again. There's a lot to chew on.
I echo that thought, Kyle. Fantastic to have you on. I look forward to future podcasts, hearing more about these 6 pillars, and hopefully meeting you in person at the latest by Grand Lodge. Hopefully that goes down like that.
Kyle, any thoughts you want to leave with our listeners? Just keep on keeping on. Keep busy with your labors in the craft and the quarries. It's always, if you've got big ambitions or big visions, which I hope you all do, it's going to take a lot of work. There's going to be a lot of challenges and some defeats, but please keep at it, because that's the only thing that's going to get us to where we all need to go. I hope to see you guys again sometime soon. Hillcrest did remodel this past year, and would like to have you all out at some point in time to see one of our educational lectures at one of our stated meetings or one of our degrees this coming year. So
sweet.
Hopefully you can make it out. That'd be great.
Right. So, guys, if you'd like to contact us, you can reach us at www.fortworth148.org, at Fort Worth Lodge 148 on Facebook, info148 at fortworth148.org. If you live in the 64th District of the Grand Lodge of Texas and you want to promote an event, please reach out to them at 64th.org, which is 64th.org. Kyle, if listeners want to reach out to any of your lodges or to you, where would they contact your lodge or you?
So probably the easiest way is just email info@dallasfreemasonry.org. We've always got somebody listening to that email address. You can feel free to reach out to me on Facebook, and I'll try to get in touch with you there. If you're a member of the Texas Freemasons group already, feel free to shoot me a message there. And of course, if you're not and listening to this and feel that you're the appropriate audience for that group, please try to join or find somebody who's already a member who can add you.
Sweet. All right, Gabe, we ready to wrap this thing up?
Sure thing.
All righty. Brethren, this is Rip Moore signing off.
Grant Gates signing off.
Gabriel Yager signing off.
Kyle Wahlquist signing off.